Most people hear Venezuela and think oil, sanctions, a simple power grab. That's the story your mind wants because it stays comfortable. But the real truth is darker. This is not about crude. This is about obedience. This is about the rules that decide who gets to breathe. In the 21st century, we are all watching the world like spectators, while our private instincts keep insisting on the old explanation. When a superpower tightens its grip around a smaller country, the first reflex is greed, oil, money, land, something primitive you can point at and feel justified in hating. And yes, you will find oil in the sentence. You will find numbers, tankers, pipelines, revenue projections. But the engine behind it is not gasoline. It is the weaponized structure of currency power, the kind of power that doesn't need to occupy a coastline to make a country kneel. Welcome to the hidden self. Today I'm going to pull the mask off a story that has been sold to you as politics and replaced with something more intimate and more psychologically revealing. Because if you can understand why Washington treats Venezuela the way it does, you can understand something about you too, about how systems train people to confuse survival with compliance, about how rules of the game become sacred until the day you realize the rules were designed to keep you small. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Now let's begin with the most basic lie. The lie is that America is trying to take Venezuelan oil. On the surface, it makes sense. Oil is valuable. Navies show up. Sanctions squeeze. Someone must be hungry for resources. But that conclusion is correct and insufficient, which is exactly how propaganda works. It gives you enough truth to keep you from asking the real question. The question is simple. Why would the United States spend massive political capital and billions of dollars to corner a supply they don't actually need? The world likes to pretend the United States is always acting out of desperation, like an addict trying to feed itself. Yet in the last decade and a half, something changed quietly. The revolution wasn't only in the Middle East, it was inside the United States itself. Shale oil, hydraulic fracturing, horizontal drilling, the whole industrial toolkit that turned energy dependence into energy dominance. When a country becomes a primary producer and starts exporting, the logic of invasion changes. The crude you crave is suddenly less relevant than the system that allocates power. Oil is still important, but it becomes a symbol, a lever, a justification. The real target is not the ground under Venezuela. The real target is the method Venezuela uses to sell and exchange value. Let me give you a psychological way to understand this. People don't fight only because they want the object. They fight to protect the position they hold relative to others. It's the same reason a controller hates when you learn a new password. It's not that the password is inherently evil. It's that the password breaks the control. It introduces autonomy. Venezuela, at least in Washington's eyes, didn't merely disappoint markets. It threatened the sacred ritual of how global commerce moves, and that ritual is built on a single currency. When you exchange oil, payments travel through financial channels that are deeply tied to American influence. Not because America is the only competent nation, but because the structure of pricing, settlement, and reserve assets makes USD the default operating system. So if Venezuela tries to sell oil without fully obeying that system, you don't treat it like a normal trade dispute. You treat it like a contagious disease. Think about how sanctions actually work. In public, they are framed like moral punishment. In reality, sanctions are engineering. They increase friction, they add risk, they make normal trade feel like jumping off a bridge. For ordinary people, this is invisible because you're not watching the spreadsheet, but businesses are watching constantly. A shipping company calculates insurance. A bank calculates compliance risk. A multinational calculates whether dealing with Venezuela means losing access to other markets. This is why sanctions don't need to fire a bullet to accomplish catastrophic outcomes. They convert economics into a slow, strangling mechanism, and yet even that doesn't capture the core point. The deeper point is that Washington isn't only trying to make money harder to move. It is trying to prevent a behavioral contagion. If Venezuela proves that alternative settlement is possible, other countries start fantasizing about options. And once people believe options exist, fear starts evaporating. That is when the rules start cracking. This is the difference between an armed war and a currency war. In an armed war, you can measure the battlefield. In a currency war, the battlefield is trust. Trust in which financial paths are safe. Trust in which currencies are acceptable. Trust in which settlement methods won't get you isolated. And trust can be destroyed without a single tank rolling across a border. Now, there's another comfortable myth you should kill today. The myth is that currency dominance is some abstract, bloodless thing. People treat money like a neutral tool. They think it's a passive instrument that society uses to trade. But currency dominance is infrastructure. It's the operating system of an entire civilization's financial plumbing. When you control the global unit of account for something as foundational as oil, you don't just get to collect fees, you get to shape behavior at scale. If every barrel must be priced and settled in your currency, then everyone else must hold your currency in reserve. That isn't just economics, that's behavioral conditioning. Imagine a world where every time you need electricity, you must buy a specific plug. You can build your own power station all you want, but without the plug that fits the standard, you can't switch the lights on. Now imagine that plug company also controls the insurance policy for the wires, the replacement parts, and the compliance rules. You don't need to send security guards to every house. You simply maintain the standards. That's what the USD system does. It provides the United States with advantages that resemble natural laws. One advantage is the ability to print currency at relatively low cost and convert it into real goods worldwide. You can produce paper and code and then trade that output for physical resources, labor, and assets. This is like collecting tax without owning a tax collection department. It's a global subsidy paid by those who must participate in the system to survive. A second advantage is the ability to carry enormous debt without immediate collapse. Again, look at the psychological implication. Debt is usually a trap. But when your debt is denominated in a currency you can create, the trap becomes a loop. The system can be delayed, restructured, rolled over. If other countries store reserves in your currency, the act of borrowing becomes a kind of self-feeding mechanism. A third advantage, the one that chills everyone who understands it, is that currency power funds military power across the world. A modern empire requires logistics at a global scale: bases, ships, surveillance, alliances, readiness. That's expensive. And the usual story of "we protect our interests" doesn't explain the entire mechanism. The mechanism is that global demand for USD translates into purchasing power that supports the infrastructure of force. This is why attempts to reduce dependence on USD are treated so aggressively. It's not sentimental, it's not personal, it's not even about revenue in the narrow sense. It's about preserving the central nervous system of the financial empire. If the central nervous system malfunctions, the body collapses. Now let's go to the moment where Venezuela becomes a symbol rather than a country. Washington saw certain moves and classified them as rebellion. Not rebellion in the romantic sense, not a movie version of revolution. Rebellion in the technical sense, behavior that violates the operating rules. Venezuela explored selling oil for alternatives. That includes efforts involving gold-based exchange and bilateral arrangements with major powers like Russia and China. The strategy, as it would be described from Venezuela's perspective, is survival. From Washington's perspective, it is an infection. It is a demonstration effect. Demonstration effects are terrifying to any controller, because controllers don't fear you will steal the most valuable item. They fear you will teach others that the controller's rules are optional. In the same way, in relationships, one boundary violation can change everything. One partner decides to stop playing the role they were assigned. Suddenly, the dynamic becomes unstable. The other person may not be able to retaliate physically, so they retaliate psychologically. Guilt, threats of abandonment, public shaming, silence as punishment. They try to restore the old order because the old order kept them safe. Currency dominance uses the same psychology. It can't let the world conclude we can escape. It needs the world to conclude escaping is too costly. Escaping ends with wreckage. This is why the Western media narrative often frames the situation as morality, democracy promotion, humanitarian concern, not because those narratives are always pure lies, but because they are convenient masks. You can't scare a population into compliance using technical settlement risk alone. People revolt when they understand the mechanism clearly. They comply when they feel there's a noble justification behind the squeeze. And that's where the hidden self theme bites. The hidden self is the part of you that prefers comforting stories, because uncomfortable truths require action. If you say it's all about oil, you can keep your worldview intact. You can keep believing that power reacts to greed the way a cartoon villain does. Then you can stay passive because you think the solution is obvious. Stop greed, demand fairness. But if you accept this is about maintaining the rules of the game, you must face a different reality. Rules are not neutral. Rules are designed by winners to keep winning. And when the winners feel threatened, they don't debate, they enforce. Now, here is the deeper mechanism that most people never want to understand. Modern coercion does not primarily aim to destroy you. It aims to make your behavior predictable in the direction the controller wants. Sanctions are a behavioral thermostat. They adjust incentives until your choices become the only choices available. You may think you are choosing, but you are choosing within an engineered room with locked doors. You can walk around the room. You can even feel like you're free while your options shrink. But you can't leave. This is why the modern war framing matters. Contemporary conflicts don't always need boots on the ground. They use financial siege tactics, targeted restrictions, secondary sanctions that punish anyone who tries to trade. The goal is not to occupy. The goal is to isolate. Isolation creates desperation. Desperation creates political fractures. Political fractures enable collapse from within. A country can be culturally intact and economically strangled at the same time. Buildings still stand. People still wake up. Markets still open. But the bloodstream becomes blocked. Imports become harder. Investment becomes impossible. Export earnings become trapped. Currency devalues. Wages fail to keep up with prices. Every day turns into a calculation of survival. And when survival becomes the main occupation of millions, the political system becomes reactive. People stop planning. They start panicking. They blame each other. They look for scapegoats. They welcome strongmen because strongmen are simple. That is how internal destruction is achieved without a single formal declaration of war. It is not dramatic. It is not cinematic. It is administrative. Now, why was Venezuela singled out? Because it was not merely failing economically. It was challenging the narrative that the USD system is inevitable. Venezuela acted like a country that could force a question. What if the rules are not immutable? What if oil can be sold outside the central currency machine? And if you are Washington, you don't treat that as an intellectual debate. You treat it as a precedent. You treat it as a threat to the demonstration effect. Think of it like dam maintenance. A huge dam does not collapse the moment someone throws a rock at it. It collapses because small cracks appear, seepage becomes a pattern, and eventually the structure fails. Currency empires are like that. They don't always fall because of one spectacular rebellion. They fall because too many small trades start deviating quietly. If enough deviation happens, the system loses its default status. Suddenly, everyone must renegotiate what they thought was automatic. Renegotiation creates uncertainty. Uncertainty destabilizes reserves. Destabilization reduces buying power. Reduced buying power constrains policy. Constrained policy invites challengers. The empire doesn't just lose money, it loses gravity. And now ask the uncomfortable question that connects this geopolitics back to the hidden self inside people. When you feel your life is controlled by invisible rules, do you blame individuals? Or do you notice the system that makes certain outcomes nearly inevitable? Most people live with hidden agreements. If I speak up, I'll be punished. If I ask for what I want, I'll lose love. If I disagree, I'll be cast as the problem. These are currency rules in the emotional realm. They are settlement mechanisms. They keep you paying the cost of compliance. When someone offers you an alternative, you may not pursue it, even if you want it, because the alternative is expensive. The controller has already engineered the cost structure. They've made the exit feel dangerous. They've created social penalties. They've trained your nervous system to interpret freedom as risk. That's why many people never escape toxic relationships or manipulative workplace cultures, even when they hate their situation. It isn't because they lack intelligence. It's because the system has already made self-rescue feel like betrayal. Venezuela's betrayal was economic, but the psychology is the same. The system responds hard when you test the boundary. Now let's address the part that makes the story feel like a conspiracy, which is the part people either love or dismiss. You don't need secret meetings in smoky rooms to understand how this works. Institutions behave according to incentives. Banks protect their access. Businesses protect their compliance. Governments protect their currency leverage. The outcome looks coordinated because the logic is consistent. In fact, if you want the most brutal explanation, it is this: leaders don't have to be evil to act brutally. They act brutally because the system rewards brutality. If you allow precedent to stand, your position weakens. If your position weakens, you lose influence. If you lose influence, you lose everything: alliances, bargaining power, and the ability to project force. This is why the sanctions are persistent. They aren't designed to be temporary. Temporary measures can fail without consequences. Persistent measures teach the world how expensive deviation is. The controller is teaching everyone watching. It's deterrence. It's a message, not a message about virtue, a message about cost. And the cost is not only money, it is disorder, it is instability, it is the slow erosion of the ability of ordinary people to plan their future. Now we can sharpen the point further. Many viewers think, okay, so it's about currency dominance. But what does that change for me? It changes everything, because if you understand currency power at a global scale, you start recognizing how power works in smaller systems too. In your job, in your community, in your family, there are usually hidden rules of exchange. There is a currency that is not always money. Sometimes it is status, sometimes it is approval, sometimes it is access, sometimes it is silence. And those currencies determine who gets to make choices and who gets disciplined for making them. When you ask for transparency and the other party refuses, they are protecting a system where they control the settlement process. When you bring up boundaries and they respond with punishment, they are enforcing a rule that makes your needs too costly. When people tell you, just be grateful, they are trying to keep your perception trapped. They want you to accept their terms because you will not challenge the pricing of your own dignity. Now bring that back to this geopolitical story. Washington is not primarily angry at Venezuela's oil fields. It is not emotionally motivated. It is protecting the pricing standard. It is protecting the ability to control the channels of exchange. So the most honest conclusion you can draw is this: Venezuela is being crushed to ensure the world continues to obey the USD rules of settlement. If you stop thinking oil and start thinking rules, the whole strategy becomes coherent. It becomes chillingly logical. Let's go even deeper, because the hidden self requires discomfort. People often crave fairness narratives, because fairness narratives imply that if we are good, we will be safe. But the USD story destroys that comfort.